Hi everyone, today we're going to talk about another filter coffee in our range, and it's the Quindío decaffeinated filter coffee. So there's a little bit more to talk about than our regular coffees because there's an extra stage involved here in decaffeination. Since we began roasting coffee in 2011, we've always carried a decaf option for customers. And I think that's really because those people that want to enjoy delicious coffee but don't want the caffeine are almost more into good flavour than those drinking it for the caffeine hit as well. So we really wanted to look after those people who aren't able to drink caffeine or have had several cups already that day but still want to drink coffee. That's all good in my book. For the first few years we were using Mexican water processed coffees, Swiss water processed coffees, as well as supercritical CO2. And those processing facilities are dotted all over the world and have various methods to remove caffeine from coffee. However, for the last 5 years, we've exclusively bought sugarcane decaffeinated coffees from Colombia. So this coffee has been bulked together from smallhold coffee farmers across 4 municipalities within the Quindío region. Armenia, the capital of Quindío, is where we travel to when we're in Colombia sourcing coffees. But the 4 regions that this has been grown in are Genova, Cordoba, Calaca and Pijao. And Pijao has been recognised by the slow food movement for its agricultural traditions and history. Typically a lot of yucca and plantain has been grown in the region, and it's very, very lush and sort of evergreen hillsides. Recently there's been more of a jump into specialty coffee production because the microclimate is very suitable for it. There's great altitudes of 1500 to 2000 metres, and the varieties being tended to there are also very conducive to producing high scoring cups that taste really great. They have Caturra and also Castillo and some Variedad Colombia as well. So as a hard coffee work to support their producers by paying nice prices for the coffee, but also dispensing agronomical advice when they're visiting with their producers. And they're the ones who've actually chosen this lot to go into the decaffeination process, as well as another one that we cut when we were there in September from Huila. So we hadn't selected the coffees to then go and be processed for decaf, but actually cut them once they'd already been earmarked for that process. We did taste some other lots that weren't decaffeinated, which we also bought, and that's the Yacuanquer espresso we're currently running from Nariño, and that's tasting super duper as well. So the smallhold farmers growing these varieties, Caturra, Castillo and Variedad Colombia, are working between 1500 and 2000 metres, and typically what happens is once they've picked the cherries, they have their own small processing facilities where they will depulp the coffee cherries and ferment them in tanks for between 12 and 14 hours, thereabouts. And that's really just a step to break down the mucilage. They're not intentionally trying to create a certain flavour in the cup, they're just trying to remove the mucilage by using the native microbiome of bacteria and yeasts to break down the sugars and enable them to wash those layers off and dry just a clean parchment layer. And the drying is typically done on either patios or casa elbas, which is the rooftop, corrugated rooftop, which slides over a patio on someone's roof. So it's economical with their footprint. So once the coffees have been dried, they will be sent to the lab to be assessed. And in this case, several of the lots have been bulked together and then they've been sent to the decaffeination plant in Colombia. And the method that it has undergone is called sugarcane decaffeination, or ethyl acetate decaffeination, which doesn't sound as romantic but is more accurate as to what's going on. That's the active compound that is derived through fermenting sugarcane, but also blackberries, grapes and beetroots and other high sugar food and fruit sources. The ethyl acetate is combined with acetic acid and spring water. And this all sounds not so nice and quite chemically, but essentially it's a vinegar and a sugar-derived alcohol and water, which is used to bathe the green coffee to target the caffeine, wash that out, and then the coffee is re-dried, polished and sealed with carnauba wax. And that's acting as a barrier to prevent further degradation of the green seeds, because decaffeination is a very invasive process. It's not gentle on the coffee. You don't want coffee to undergo that and expect it to come out the other end alive. You assume some degree of collateral damage with decaffeinating coffees. Yes, removing caffeine, but potentially removing deliciousness. But we do find actually you can preserve a lot more of the good characteristics in coffee if good coffee goes into the process. Through undergoing that decaffeination method in Colombia and then travelling to us in the UK, you actually shorten the journey it has to take and the time spent in a hot, humid environment in a shipping container, at a dock, on the water. You minimise the miles that it has to travel, but also the time it takes. So we're able to work with fresher crops and that have travelled less, which is also at play when it comes to degrading good coffee flavour. So once we receive our decaffeinated green coffee, we have a little quality control assessment, and inevitably they always look very, very strange compared to our normal coffees. They take on a much darker hue of green through the decaffeination process. And so we don't typically roast by visual cues anyway, but if you were to compare how this coffee looks during the roast process to any other normal washed coffee, it looks like you're really roasting it super duper dark, when in effect you're not. So what I normally do when I bring a bag of decaf filter home to brew, I'll bring it in the bag that we provide, but then I always put it into a canister or something where I can remove any excess air. And that's just because I don't tend to drink this at the same rate I do our other coffees. I will have a cup here and there in the evening, but it takes me a lot longer too. So something like the Atmos by Fellow is a really good option if you don't go through a bag of decaf coffee as often, but you want to have it there in case someone comes over who can't have caffeine, or if you really are craving something after dinner and know you don't want to disrupt your sleep. So once we roast the decaffeinated green coffee, we produce something which looks like a very, very dark roast compared to our other coffees. It's almost got like a shiny surface to it, much darker in hue. However, when you grind the coffee and you smell it and you brew it, you realise that actually the roast degree is appropriate for the coffee, and in this case for filter brewing rather than espresso brewing. Historically, we only really did one roast profile for our decaf coffees, and that was so that it was going to work well as espresso and in milk drinks. Whereas we realised there's a growing demand for people wanting to brew our decaf coffees as filter coffee. In the past, we would have to recommend altering some of your brewing variables to reduce extraction and curb bitterness, which can come about through working with a coffee that's slightly more developed in a filter method. But now we can brew without really changing anything and achieve something really, really balanced and clean without having to compromise. So offering a filter version of the decaf coffee is something relatively new for us, but really, really well respected, and we have a lot of really nice feedback from customers on it. So I'm very glad that we were able to offer this. The first thing I always try and get in the decaf coffee is the aroma profile. And I'm always looking with a really, really highly magnifying glass to see if I can detect any traits that are telling of the decaffeination process. Each decaffeination processing method will have its own sort of hallmark or fingerprint that it will leave on a coffee. And I really want to have as little of that as possible in the cup, because that's not the true taste of the coffee. It's telling what's happened to it, yes, but it's not really what I want to taste when I'm experiencing the cup. And here I don't really detect a whole lot of it. I know what it is, so I'm biased, but I really couldn't say for sure. If you put this on a table in front of some medium to high level of experienced cuppers, I'm sure some people wouldn't detect this as decaffeinated coffee. Okay, it's a really, really juicy cup, which is surprising. I don't really drink a cup of decaf coffee and expect it to be enjoyable on too many levels, but it's initially just so juicy, and it carries this really lovely tropical fruit flavour to it. Almost reminds me of papaya and very, very ripe mango, where you have a lot of fruity characteristics to it, but not so much bright acidity. It's just more sweet and refreshing. Oh, that's really good. Yeah, definitely that sort of candied orange peel, chocolate, definitely blending into carob, that more basic chocolate character. It's not a highly refined, high quality chocolate flavour I'm getting here, it's more just that satisfying impression of chocolatiness. There's also quite a lot of subtle warming baking spices happening in the background. Reminds me a little bit of ground ginger, nutmeg, those kind of things. It gives it an extra edge for sure, extra level of satisfaction. Very desserty. And again, I think if you've just had something very, very sweet after dinner, but you don't want to have caffeine at that point, this is something that will stand up to that. You're not going to feel like the coffee is very bitter or acidic after something quite sweet. I think it will pair quite nicely. Wow, okay. So that's the Quindío decaffeinated filter from Workshop. We have a really, really lovely connection now with Azahar Coffees to source great Colombian coffees, in this case undergoing the sugarcane decaffeination method in Colombia itself. And then we're trying to roast it to highlight all the very, very best characteristics, in this case for filter brewing. So we're getting tropical fruits, some dried or cooked citrus, and lots of chocolate, and it's a super balanced, clean cup with very, very little impression of the decaffeination method itself. I would be aware as well that if you absolutely cannot imbibe any caffeine whatsoever, this isn't really suitable. Because if you were to drink 30 to 40 cups of this, you'd probably have the same amount of caffeine as if you were to drink 1 cup of regular non-decaffeinated coffee. So don't assume that it's 100% caffeine free. Okay, I'm gonna sit and enjoy this cup of coffee, and I can have many more because there's no real effect. But that's all from us today. Thank you ever so much for watching, and we'll see you soon.